Okay, so let's set up a couple more things really quickly. Let's right-click on our sphere and say Add Item Mask or Create Item Mask. So we have something just for our sphere here in our shader tree. And then I'm actually going to also go back to my items list. Let's find that ramp mesh. I'm going to right-click that and create an item mask for that as well. So this is going to be just for our ramp. Now our ramp, we want to have 0 specular, but we want 100% diffuse, so it's nice and bright white. And then on our sphere, we want to make sure that conserve energy is turned on so that the specular amount affects the diffuse amount. You never want for the specular amount to add to the diffuse amount to be more than 100%. So by conserving energy, we make sure that we can't accidentally apply unrealistic amounts of light to this object. And then I'll leave the rest of this stuff just the way it is. Let's set the specular back to 0 for a second. So we have just a purely diffuse gray object. Now, in terms of setting up the lighting so that we know exactly what it should look like, what we can do is go back to Layout and drop in a color checker, right? And then I take that color checker. I'm going to grab the mesh item for that. I'm going to bring it up 50 millimeters on the Y, and then forward 51 millimeters on the Z. And what that's going to do for us, not 51 meters, there we go. And what that's going to do for us is give us a color chart to look at as we're setting up this scene. So we have a really good idea of what this sphere should actually look like in terms of its color. And right now I can see that all this stuff is kind of dark. But how dark is it? I'm not really sure. So to give myself an absolute, something to compare against, what I recommend is creating a new analytical scene. I know that that's kind of extra work, but you only have to do it once. So I'll hit blank, and I'm going to create a completely blank scene. Go to my Layout tab. Let's drop in our color checker, G22. Let's go to our shader tree. We're going to add a final color output under Special, and we'll set that output to Gamma 2.2. I'm going to go to my items list and add a camera. And that camera I'll set to X, Y, and let's see, the Z should be 2 meters, let's say. No rotation. I'm going to set the projection type to orthographic again. Let's look through the camera really quickly. See what we've got here. Zoom in a little bit so that this fits. Looks good. Now we'll go back to our render tab here, see what we've got. Let's go to the render settings, global illumination, ambient intensity 1, and this should give us a perfect render. We know exactly what these colors should look like with no lights, no shadows, no nothing. Let's hit render, render. And then I'm going to save this image somewhere where I can get to it. I'm going to go to my assets for Moto. I'm going to grab my images folder, and let's save this as a ping image. Just a typical PNG image, and we'll call this color checker ping. That's fine. And now, as I'm working, I'm going to close this up. I'm going to go back to my assets directories, into my images, open up that color checker ping in the viewer, whatever viewer you use on your OS. Scale it down to the right size. And now, as I'm working, I can always pop this up and I can compare it to the image on the screen. And if they look the same, then I know I'm doing good. If this one looks darker, as it does, I know I need more light on it. So let's go back to Moto and actually set up these lights so that they look a little bit more gooder. So I'm going to grab this front one. I'm going to bring it a little bit further forward so that we get more light cast on the front here. And also, I want to do most of the lighting work with that top light because that's the neutral one. We're just going to use the side ones just kind of to add just a little splash of color on either side and for reflection purposes as well. But, you know, we want to do most of the work with that big neutral top light. So we're getting closer, right? Still need a little bit more, so let's bump that up even higher. Just say lighting 5 there. That's looking much, much better. All that looks good. So we'll go back here. Now let's hide our color card for a second. So we have just our object on the screen. And this does look a little bit blown out on the top, but you got to think about it. Our material, actually, if we go down here to our, let's see, we want our sphere material. That guy is bright white. It's a very bright white material, so it should be bright on the screen. But let's set it to something else. Let's actually take this. I'm going to turn it down, say, to 50% diffuse. We'll go and turn up our specular amount to 20, let's say, and our Fresnel to 60. Let's make sure that roughness is at 0, and then check match specular for this guy, and turn on blurry reflection at 128 samples. We're going to talk about more what that means in another video, but this should be a good starting point. Now that specular is pretty hot, but it's at least something that we can see what's going on our screen. And you can see there's one highlight on one side, there's one highlight on the other, and a big hot one on the top. Right? So let's take this one on one side, and I want to move it around to the side a little more because it's just too much on the front. Right? We'll take this one and do the same thing. Let's just move that back over to the side a little more, move it back out a little bit on the X, move it down some so that we're right there. That looks better. And then I can take the color for that. I'll set this right one in Kelvin to 7500. And on this left one, we'll set its Kelvin to 6000. So we get a little bit of visible warmth there on the side. We'll take this top one, and I actually want to increase the edge fade a little bit. Let's turn up that edge fade opacity somewhat so we start to see some of that appearing on our screen up there. That looks pretty good. And that's starting to look like decent reflections now. You know, that's looking okay. So what we do is we go back now to our color checker. Let's turn the color checker back on, and we'll bring it up in real life. Looking a little bit dark now, right? It's not quite as bright as it used to be. So let's turn this up some. Let's actually, instead of just heating up that top lamp, let's heat up these side ones a little bit. I'll just heat up both of them to, say, 3 on each side. That's brightening things up substantially. You can see we're getting really, really close now. This is almost where we want to be. So I'll just kick that up just one more notch on the top light. That's looking really good. So we go back, we double check our color card. That looks great. What you might consider doing if you want to be really, really anal about it is go to Render, Render. And once this image comes out, then you can save that, you can open it in Photoshop, and you can really do a tight side-by-side comparison and make sure that these colors are exactly what they should be. In the meantime, I think we're just about ready to start making use of this thing.